My wife Sarah died suddenly. It was a car crash. Horrible. 1 second she was there, laughing as she waved goodbye, heading to her weekly art class. The next, a phone. An officer's voice, calm and detached, telling me my world had just ended. I remember the sounds, the sirens in the distance, the ringing in my ears, but mostly I remember the silence that followed. The quiet house, the empty side of the bed, the way her scent slowly faded from her clothes. I was numb, just existing, going through the motions people do when their heart has been ripped out. The funeral arrangements began almost immediately. Sarah's family, her parents Harold and Eleanor, and her sister Beth swooped in. They were always a bit overbearing, a bit traditional, a bit too fond of telling me how things should be. But I was in too much pain to argue. I just nodded. Agreed to everything. The expensive casket, the fancy floral arrangements, the catered reception. Sarah deserved the best, they said. I just wanted to honor her. I wanted to give her a peaceful send-off. And I wanted to disappear into the grief. I handed over my credit card, no questions asked. Thousands of dollars just like that. Because it was for Sarah. Because she was everything. Then came the obituary. This was the real horror. Not the crash, not the phone call, not the empty house. Those were tragedies. This was a calculated, deliberate act of erasure. Her sister Beth had offered to handle it. "Let us take care of everything, David," she'd said, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "You've been through so much." I was grateful. Too numb to think straight, so I trusted them. Big mistake. I picked up the local paper the morning the obituary was set to run. My hands were shaking, not from nerves, but from the raw emptiness inside me. I was looking for comfort, a public acknowledgement of her life, of our life. What I found was an ice pick to the heart. There it was, bold print, Sarah Marie Henderson. Her birth date, her death date. A beautiful paragraph about her love for art, her kindness, her community work. Then the list of survivors. She is survived by her loving parents, Harold and Eleanor Henderson, and her devoted sister, Beth Sullivan, along with numerous aunts, uncles, and cousins. My name wasn't there. Not in the list of survivors. Not as her husband. Not as the man who had loved her fiercely for 10 years, who had shared every dream, every meal, every secret with her. It was like I never existed. Like our marriage, our life together, was a figment of my imagination. It was a public declaration that I was nobody to Sarah. A stranger, an interloper. I reread it, again and again. My eyes scanned the words, hoping to find some hidden sentence, some small print that mentioned me. Nothing, just an empty space where my name should have been. My name, David Miller. Her husband. The man she shared a home with, a bed with, a life with. The man who was now a widower, utterly alone and apparently erased. A cold, hard certainty settled in my gut. A switch flipped. The numbness that had cocooned me since the accident shattered, replaced by a searing, white-hot rage. This wasn't grief anymore. This was a betrayal. An act of war. They had taken my wife from me once. Now they were trying to take my memory of her, my place in her life, my very identity. I remembered the money. The thousands of dollars I had just handed over for the funeral arrangements. The elaborate flowers, the expensive casket, the catering. My credit card slip was still on the kitchen counter, a grim reminder. And in that instant, the decision was made. Simple. Absolute. I wasn't paying for anything anymore. Not one dime. If I wasn't her husband in death, I wasn't her husband in debt. Let them deal with it. Let them pay for their carefully curated lie. My wife Sarah was gone, but I was still here. And I wasn't going to let them erase me too. This was just the beginning. The phone felt heavy in my hand as I dialed Beth's number. My voice was calm, too calm. "Beth, I just saw the obituary." Silence on the other end. Then a brittle, "Oh, isn't it lovely?" We tried to capture her spirit. "You forgot something, Beth," I said, my voice dangerously low. "You forgot me." Her husband. Another pause. Then a sigh. "David, we just kept it simple. You know, family. Traditional." "Traditional?" I almost laughed. "Traditional is including the grieving husband. The man who lived with her, loved her, married her." My voice began to rise. "Completely wiped me out. You made it look like I was nobody to her. Like our marriage was a lie." "Don't be dramatic, David," Beth snapped, her mask of sympathy finally slipping. "It was just an oversight. We had so much on our minds. And frankly, you weren't exactly close to our family. That was the breaking point." "Close to your family?" "No, Beth, I wasn't. Because your family never accepted me. You always treated me like an outsider. But Sarah loved me. She chose me. And I was her husband. In life and in death." My voice cracked on the last word. "And because you decided to erase me, because you decided my love and my grief didn't matter, I am pulling out of the funeral expenses." Another silence, longer this time. Then a gasp. "What? Are you serious?" "David, that's monstrous. Sarah deserves a proper funeral." "She does," I agreed, my voice now colder than ice. "And she was my wife. If I am not her husband in the obituary, I am not her husband financially. You want to pretend I don't exist? Fine. Then you pay for the funeral. Every single cent. Consider it the cost of your deception." I could hear her sputtering, trying to form words. But I didn't wait. I hung up. My hand was shaking again. But this time, it was from a strange mix of anger and twisted satisfaction. I wasn't a doormat. I wasn't just going to sit back and let them rewrite my life with Sarah. This was my line in the sand. My way of fighting back, even in the midst of the most unimaginable pain. Sarah deserved better than their lies, and I deserved more than to be erased. The phone rang immediately. It was Beth, then Harold, then Eleanor. All of them screaming, accusing, threatening. I let it ring. Let them panic. Let them realize the consequences of their actions. The grief was still there, a constant ache in my chest, but now it was laced with a steel resolve. They wanted a fight. They just got one, and this time I wasn't going to be the one backing down. The storm broke almost immediately. My phone became a hotline of accusations. Beth called back. Then Harold. Then Eleanor. Each call escalating in volume and vitriol. "David, what are you doing?" "Harold," Sarah's father bellowed into the phone. His voice, usually so measured and imposing, was now laced with panic. "This is outrageous. You agreed to pay." "I agreed to pay as Sarah's husband," I replied, my voice steady, despite the tremor in my hand. "The obituary makes it quite clear you don't consider me that. So, no husband, no payment, simple. It was an oversight." Eleanor, Sarah's mother, wailed, her voice cracking. "We were distraught. You can't do this to Sarah. She deserves a beautiful send-off." "She does," I countered. "And as her husband, I wanted to provide it. But you stripped me of that right. You stripped me of my identity in her life. Do you have any idea how that feels? To see the woman you love, your wife, acknowledged in death, and you are simply gone. Like our 10 years together meant nothing." "Don't be ridiculous," Beth shrieked. clearly on speakerphone with her parents. "You are just trying to cause trouble. You are just trying to control things as always." "Control?" I almost laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. "You think I'm trying to control things? You rewrote history in black and white for the entire town to see. You decided who was important in Sarah's life, and I didn't make the cut." My voice hardened. "Consider this my very clear, very public, very expensive statement that I will not be erased." They argued. They pleaded. They threatened legal action, though I knew they had no ground. There was no written agreement, just my word, given in a moment of utter despair. I just repeated my stance. No husband in the obituary, no payment for the funeral. You want Sarah buried with the dignity she deserves. You pay for it yourselves. You made your choice. They kept calling for days. Texts filled with increasingly nasty insults. They called me selfish, heartless, a monster. They said I was dishonoring Sarah. But every accusation, every hateful word, only solidified my resolve. They didn't care about me. They never had. This wasn't about Sarah's dignity. This was about their control, their narrative, their public image. Grief is a strange beast. It consumes you, leaves you hollow. But this new burning anger was different. It didn't replace the grief. It sat alongside it, a twisted companion. It fueled me. It gave me a strange, defiant energy. I still cried sometimes for hours for Sarah. But those tears were now mixed with a simmering fury at her family for desecrating her memory, and my own. I thought about Sarah. She was a vibrant, kind soul, full of life and laughter. She was an artist, and she saw the world in colors and textures that most of us missed. She was also fiercely loyal. She knew her family could be difficult. She always tried to bridge the gap between us, to smooth things over. "They just don't understand you, David." She'd often say, a touch of sadness in her eyes. "They mean well, but I knew better. They never meant well for me. They tolerated me because Sarah loved me." They always made subtle digs, questioned my career, my choices, my family background. They saw me as not good enough for their precious daughter. I remember one Christmas dinner, early in our marriage. Sarah had just gotten a small art grant, and I was so proud. I mentioned it to Harold, hoping for a shared moment of joy. "Oh, that's nice," he'd said, taking a sip of his wine. "But when are you two going to settle down? Get a real house? Start thinking about a family? Sarah isn't getting any younger." The implication was clear. My modest salary wasn't enough. My life choices were inadequate. Sarah had squeezed my hand under the table, her face apologetic. I just smiled tightly and changed the subject. That was their style, never outright hostile, always subtly demeaning. After the initial barrage of calls from Sarah's family, a strange quiet descended. I assumed they were either planning their next attack or, more likely, scrambling to figure out how to cover the substantial funeral costs. The funeral was just 3 days away. I hadn't heard a word from the funeral home, which meant my credit card hadn't been charged for anything new. They were holding off, waiting for instructions, I suppose. I spent those days in a daze, a mix of profound sadness and bitter resolve. I replayed every memory of Sarah, trying to separate my true grief from the noise of her family's betrayal. I looked at our wedding photos, at the album of our trips, at the little clay sculptures she'd made that sat on our bookshelves. Every one of them reminded me of her warmth, her humor, her boundless energy. And every one of them silently screamed, "He was there." The lack of my name in the obituary was more than just an insult. It was a distortion of Sarah's life story. Parents had a very specific narrative they wanted to uphold. Sarah, the dutiful daughter, the talented artist, who had lived a life entirely within their orbit. My presence, my life with her, complicated that narrative. It showed her as an independent woman who made her own choices, who chose me, and they couldn't have that, not even in death. I knew, deep down, that Sarah would have been horrified. She loved me with all her heart. She often told me I was her rock, her safe harbor. She'd fought with them about me before, though she rarely let me see the full extent of their disagreements. She'd always emerge from their visits looking tired, sometimes tearful. They just want what's best for me, she'd say, but her eyes would betray the strain. She tried to protect me from their judgment, but she couldn't protect me from this. The funeral home called the next day. It was Mr. Davis, a kind man with a gentle voice. "Mr. Miller, I am calling about Mrs. Henderson's arrangements. There seems to be a slight confusion regarding payment." "No confusion, Mr. Davies," I said, my voice flat. "I am not paying. I've made that clear to her family." A pause. "I understand this is a difficult time, but the deposits made thus far don't cover the full cost, and there are outstanding balances for the casket, the chapel, the cremation services." He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "I am aware of what's owed," I replied, "and as I said, I am not paying it. You can direct all inquiries to Harold and Eleanor Henderson. They are managing the arrangements now. But Mr. Miller, you were listed as the primary contact and payer when the arrangements were initially made. And I was also listed as her husband," I pointed out. Her family, however, chose to omit that fact from her published obituary. Since they've publicly severed my connection to Sarah, I've decided to sever my financial connection to her funeral. It's only fair. Wouldn't you agree? Mr. Davies sighed. "I understand your position, Mr. Miller. This is a very delicate situation. We'll contact the Hendersons." He sounded weary, like he'd been dealing with family drama for decades. He probably had. I hung up, feeling a grim satisfaction. They were getting exactly what they deserved. The financial burden was significant. Thousands upon thousands, it would hurt them. And that, I realized, was a part of the twisted justice I now sought. They wanted to hurt me by erasing me from Sarah's life. I would hurt them by making them pay for their public lie. It wouldn't bring Sarah back, but it was all I had left to fight for. The funeral was tomorrow. The thought of it, of being there, of seeing them, filled me with dread and a strange anticipation. Would they really go through with it, without me paying? Would they make a public scene? I didn't know. But I knew one thing. I wouldn't let them win. Not completely. The day of Sarah's funeral dawned gray and somber, a perfect reflection of my internal landscape. My stomach churned with a nauseating mix of grief, dread, and a strange, defiant anticipation. Would I go? Should I go? The family had made it clear I was persona non grata, but Sarah was my wife. It was her funeral. I decided I had to go, not for them, but for Sarah. To be there, in spirit if not in their good graces. To silently bear witness to her life, even if they refused to acknowledge mine with her. I dressed in my darkest suit, the one I'd worn to our friend's wedding a few years ago. It felt impossibly heavy. The funeral was at a large traditional church. One Sarah rarely attended, but her family favored for its grandeur. As I pulled into the parking lot, I saw a modest crowd already gathering. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This was it. As I walked towards the church entrance, heads turned. Whispers started. I heard my name, mixed with hushed tones of disapproval. Sarah's family had clearly been busy painting me as the villain. I saw Beth first, standing near the entrance, flanked by Harold and Eleanor. Their faces were stony, eyes narrowed as I approached. I didn't make eye contact. I just walked past them, head held high, and entered the church. The air inside was heavy with the scent of lilies and sorrow. Sarah's casket stood at the front, draped in white roses, her favorite. My throat tightened. This was real. She was really gone. I found an empty pew towards the back, far enough away from the front row where her family sat, but close enough to see the altar, to see her. I sat down, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, trying to control the tremors that ran through my body. The service began. The eulogies. Harold spoke first, his voice cracking with emotion as he painted a picture of his beloved daughter, focusing heavily on her childhood and her accomplishments, her bond with her parents and sister. Talked about her dedication to her family, a subtle jab at me, the outsider. Eleanor read a poem. Beth spoke of Sarah's kindness and generosity, always careful to avoid any mention of our life together, our shared dreams, our marriage. It was like I was a ghost in the room, watching my own erasure in real time. The pain was immense. It wasn't just the grief for Sarah, which was a constant dull ache. It was the additional layer of being publicly dismissed, denied, made invisible. Every word they spoke about Sarah felt like a lie, or at least a carefully edited version of the truth. They were trying to claim her entirely for themselves, to rewrite her history to fit their narrative. During one particularly saccharine eulogy from a distant cousin, I heard a quiet murmur from the pew behind me. That poor man. To be treated so shamefully. It was an older woman looking at me with genuine sympathy. A small flicker of warmth pierced through the ice around my heart. Someone saw, someone understood. When the service concluded and the mourners began to file out to the graveside, I remained seated for a moment. I watched as Harold and Eleanor, red-eyed and grim-faced, approached the casket. They didn't look at me. They didn't acknowledge my presence. Beth glanced over, her lips pursed in a silent, accusatory line. I got up then and walked towards the casket. I knew they wouldn't stop me. This was my last chance to say goodbye. My way. I placed my hand on the polished wood, the surface cool beneath my palm. "Goodbye, my love," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. "I will never let them diminish what we had." I felt a tear slip down my cheek, hot and stinging. It wasn't just for Sarah, it was for me too, for the profound injustice of it all. As I turned to leave, I saw a familiar face, a man I vaguely recognized from Sarah's art community. He gave me a subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement. It wasn't much, but it was something. It reminded me that there were people who knew Sarah's full story, people who knew about us. The family's attempts at erasure weren't foolproof. I didn't go to the graveside service. I couldn't bear another public performance of their false narrative. Instead, I drove home, the silence in the car deafening. The house felt emptier than ever. The anger that had fueled me through the service now ebbed, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. I had endured it. I had shown up. But the battle was far from over. They had made their statement, and I had made mine. The funeral was paid for, presumably by them now, and I was left with the bitter truth. That my love for Sarah, my place in her life, was now just a contested territory, a battleground. Quiet days that followed Sarah's funeral were filled with a heavy, oppressive silence. The phone, once ringing off the hook with her family's indignant calls, was now silent. They had made their statement at the funeral, freezing me out, and I had made mine by attending, a defiant ghost in their carefully constructed narrative. I spent my time wandering the house, picking up Sarah's things, remembering her touch, her scent. I found myself drawn to her art studio, a small, sunlit room filled with canvases, brushes, and the lingering smell of oil paint. It was here that she truly came alive, where she expressed herself without reservation. As I looked through her sketchbooks, flipping past half-finished landscapes and whimsical portraits, I noticed a small leather-bound journal tucked away in a hidden compartment of her drafting table. It was one I hadn't seen before. My heart pounded as I pulled it out. Could this be it? A secret? A message? Something that would explain everything? I sat down on her stool, the worn leather comforting beneath me, and opened the journal. The first few pages were typical journal entries. Observations about nature, ideas for paintings, daily musings. But as I flipped further, the entries became more personal, more raw. She wrote about her frustrations with her family, their constant disapproval, their attempts to control her life. "They just don't understand, David," she had written on one page, her familiar looping handwriting filling the lines. "They want me to be this perfect, quiet version of myself, the one they can show off at church and bridge club. But I am not. I am messy, and I am loud, and I love fiercely. And they just can't seem to accept that I chose David, someone so different from their ideal son-in-law." My breath hitched. This was it, the validation I so desperately needed. She saw it. She knew. She wrote about specific incidents. Christmas dinner, where Harold made the veiled comments about my career. A vacation where Eleanor had subtly tried to set her up with a nice young doctor from their church, even though Sarah was already married to me. Beth's constant jabs about my unconventional lifestyle. One entry, dated just a few months before her death, struck me particularly hard. "Mom and Dad had another go at me about David today. They think he's too unstable, too artistic to provide for me properly. They said they worry about my future, about our finances. It makes me so angry. David is the most stable, loving person I know. He supports my dreams. He celebrates my quirks. He doesn't try to fit me into a box. They just want control. They want me to be their Sarah, not my Sarah. It's suffocating. I wish they could just see how happy I am with him. But I don't think they ever will." I traced her words with my finger, a wave of profound sadness washing over me. She had fought for me. She had defended our love. And now she was gone, and they were still trying to erase me. The journal was a painful but beautiful testament to her unwavering love and her struggle to navigate the complexities of her family, while staying true to herself and to us. Tucked between two pages, I found a small folded piece of paper. It wasn't an official document, just a handwritten note. My name, David Miller, was written clearly at the top. Below it, a simple statement. "In the event of my death, I want David to have everything. He knows what matters to me, and he will honor my wishes. He is my partner, my love, my life. He is my family." Below that, her signature, Sarah Marie Henderson. And then a little heart drawn next to it. My eyes welled up. This wasn't a formal will, not legally binding in the same way, but it was her voice, clear as a bell, cutting through the silence, cutting through their lies. It was her final act of love, her ultimate validation. She knew. She must have known instinctively that her family would try to control her narrative even after she was gone. And she had left me. This a quiet rebellion. This note changed everything. It wasn't just about the funeral expenses anymore, or the obituary. It was about proving her truth. It was about honoring her final wish. If they had tried to erase me, this was Sarah's way of writing me back in. I sat there for a long time, holding the journal, holding the note, feeling Sarah's presence in the quiet room. The anger was still there, a simmering ember, but now it was accompanied by a powerful sense of purpose. I had proof, I had her words. and I wouldn't let them be forgotten. This was my fight, not just for myself, but for Sarah, for our love, and I wasn't going to back down. Not 1 inch. The journal and Sarah's handwritten note were a revelation, a powerful counter-narrative to her family's blatant attempts at erasure. They were my secret weapon, a source of profound comfort and renewed resolve. I knew now that Sarah had understood her family's controlling nature, their disapproval of me, and she had taken steps to ensure her true feelings were known. But what could I do with them? The note wasn't a formal will, so it couldn't be presented as legal proof of her estate wishes without a fight. Yet, it was her voice, clear and undeniable. I needed to strategize. My first thought was to confront Harold and Eleanor directly, to present them with Sarah's journal and the note. But I quickly dismissed that idea. They would deny, deflect, accuse me of forging it, anything to maintain their narrative. They were too invested in their public image, too proud to admit they were wrong. I needed allies. My own family was geographically distant, but I called my sister Claire. She listened patiently as I recounted everything, from the obituary to the discovery of the journal. Claire had always liked Sarah, and had seen glimpses of the Hendersons' dismissive attitude towards me. "David, that's just awful," Claire said, her voice filled with sympathy and outrage. "But this journal, this note that's powerful, Sarah knew you, she loved you. This proves it." "I know," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But how do I use it? What do I do?" "You need legal counsel, David," she advised. "A lawyer who specializes in estate disputes, maybe even defamation. Someone who can help you navigate this without letting them bully you." The idea of involving lawyers made my stomach clench. I hated conflict, and the thought of more public scrutiny, more fighting, was exhausting. But then I looked at Sarah's note again. "He is my partner, my love, my life. He is my family." This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Sarah's legacy, her truth. I contacted a lawyer Claire recommended, a no-nonsense woman named Miss Chen. She listened intently as I laid out the whole story, showing her the obituary, the journal, and the note. She nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "This is a clear attempt to deny your spousal rights and erase your relationship," Miss Chen stated, her voice crisp. "While the note isn't a formal will, it's strong evidence of Sarah's testamentary intent, especially in conjunction with her marriage to you. We can certainly contest any claims her family makes regarding her estate." "What about the funeral costs?" I asked. "They want me to pay, but I refused." Miss Chen gave a faint smile. "Good for you, Mr. Miller. Since you were omitted from the obituary and effectively disinvited from participating as her husband, you have a very strong case that you were relieved of any financial obligations for the funeral." "They cannot have it both ways. They cannot deny your status as her husband publicly while demanding you fulfill the financial responsibilities of one." A small victory, but it felt immense. It validated my stand. Miss Chen suggested a multi-pronged approach. First, formally notifying the Hendersons that I intended to contest any claims they made on Sarah's estate, citing the handwritten note as evidence of her true wishes. Second, sending a cease and desist letter regarding any further attempts to disparage my relationship with Sarah. And third, if necessary, taking it to court. The thought of legal action was daunting, but it also offered a path forward, a way to fight for Sarah's truth. A few days later, I received a phone call from an unexpected source. Sarah's Aunt Carol. She was her mother's sister, a gentle woman who had always been kind to me, though she rarely spoke against Harold and Eleanor. "David, I heard about the obituary," she said, her voice soft and apologetic. "I was so upset when I saw it. It's a disgrace. Sarah loved you so much." A wave of relief washed over me. An insider, someone from their side acknowledging the truth. "Thank you, Carol," I said, my voice thick. "It means a lot to hear that." "I tried to talk to Eleanor and Harold, but they wouldn't listen," she continued. "They're so set in their ways, they've convinced themselves you were never right for Sarah. It's all about appearance with them, you know." "I do," I sighed. "I found Sarah's journal, Carol, and a note. She wrote about them, about her feelings, about how much she loved me." "Oh, David," Carol whispered, her voice filled with sadness. "She always confided in me a little. She always said you were her true family. Hold on to that. Don't let them take that away from you." Her words, simple as they were a balm to my raw soul. They solidified my belief that I was fighting, not just for myself, but for Sarah's truth to be known. I wasn't alone. There were people, even within her family circle, who saw through the facade. This small act of kindness, this validation from Aunt Carol, gave me the courage to move forward with Miss Chen's plan. The legal battle would be tough, emotionally draining, but I had Sarah's words and her love to guide me. The legal process began, slow and deliberate, a stark contrast to the swift, emotional upheaval of the past weeks. Miss Chen, true to her word, sent formal letters to Harold and Eleanor Henderson, challenging their claim to Sarah's estate and refuting any responsibility for the funeral costs. The response was immediate, predictable, and furious. They accused me of fraud, of disrespecting Sarah's memory, of being a gold digger. The lawyer, a terse, aggressive man, sent back a letter filled with bluster and thinly veiled threats. It was exactly what Miss Chen had anticipated. "They're trying to intimidate you, Mr. Miller," she explained during a phone call. "They're used to getting their way. We just need to stand firm." And I did. Armed with Sarah's journal and her note, my resolve was unbreakable. The journal, in particular, was a powerful piece of evidence. It chronicled years of their subtle and not so subtle disapproval, their attempts to control Sarah's life, and her growing frustration with them. Painted a very different picture of the loving family they presented to the world. The legal back and forth was draining. Each letter, each phone call from Miss Chen was a reminder of the chasm that had opened between me and Sarah's family. It felt like I was fighting for her all over again, defending our love, our history, against their relentless attempts to erase it. The grief was still a constant companion, but it was now laced with the bitterness of this ongoing conflict. One afternoon, a package arrived. It was from Harold and Eleanor. Inside, without a note, were two small boxes. One contained Sarah's wedding ring, the other, a locket she always wore, given to her by her grandmother. They were clearly trying to buy me off, to offer me trinkets in exchange for dropping my claims. It was an insult, a deliberate attempt to devalue our love and our marriage. My hands trembled as I looked at the ring, a symbol of our unbreakable bond. To them, it was just a piece of jewelry to be returned. I took the items to Miss Chen. She shook her head, a hint of disdain on her face. "They are trying to control the narrative, even down to her personal effects. This is a common tactic to avoid a full accounting of the estate. Do not accept anything without a full inventory and agreement." I agreed. I wouldn't be bought. Sarah's love wasn't for sale. As the weeks turned into months, the news of the dispute started to trickle into wider circles. Sarah had been well known in the local art community. People started asking questions. Rumors spread. Some were sympathetic to me, having known Sarah and seen the Hendersons' controlling nature. Others, who only knew the Hendersons' public facade, sided with them, believing their narrative of me being a selfish, opportunistic widower. I even saw a post on a local community forum, obviously started by someone close to the Hendersons, condemning me for refusing to pay for the funeral. The comments section was a battleground. How could anyone be so heartless? One comment read, "He's dishonoring his wife's memory." Another echoed. But then, surprisingly, other comments started to appear. "I knew Sarah. She adored her husband. Something doesn't add up. Heard her family was always difficult. Maybe here is more to this story. You don't just forget to put someone's husband in an obituary unless it's intentional." It was infuriating, but also strangely validating. My private pain was becoming public, but so was their deception. The truth, even in whispers, was starting to emerge. One day, I received a call from a reporter from the local paper, the same paper that had published the damning obituary. She had heard rumors of the estate dispute and my refusal to pay for the funeral. She wanted my side of the story. My first instinct was to decline. I craved privacy, not more public scrutiny. But then I thought of Sarah's journal, her words, her fight. This was an opportunity, not just to defend myself, but to set the record straight for Sarah, to ensure her truth wasn't buried with her. I agreed to the interview. The thought of exposing such raw, personal grief and conflict to the public was terrifying. But it was also the ultimate confrontation. This was my chance to tell the world what Sarah's family had done, and why I had responded the way I did. It was a gamble, a painful one. But for Sarah, for our love, I was willing to take it. The climax was fast approaching. The interview with the reporter Emily was both cathartic and excruciating. We sat in my living room, surrounded by Sarah's art and the quiet echoes of our life together. I spoke for hours, recounting everything. The accident, the obituary, the shock, the agonizing decision to refuse payment, the discovery of Sarah's journal and note, and the ongoing legal battle. I handed her copies of the obituary, relevant snippets from the journal with Miss Chen's approval, and even the note. Emily listened patiently, scribbling notes, her face a mix of sympathy and journalistic curiosity. She asked probing questions, but never sensationally. She seemed genuinely interested in the truth. "Why now?" she asked at one point. "Why go public with such a personal dispute?" I looked at a framed photo of Sarah smiling, her eyes bright. "Because they tried to erase me," I said, my voice thick. "They tried to pretend my love, my life with Sarah, never existed, and they wanted me to pay for that lie. I can't let them rewrite her story or ours. Sarah deserved better than that. Our love deserved better." The article came out a few days later. It was fair, balanced, and utterly devastating for the Hendersons. Emily had clearly done her research, incorporating details from the journal without betraying Sarah's most private thoughts. The headline read, "Widower refuses funeral costs after being erased from wife's obituary. A battle over love, legacy, and lies." The article painted a picture of a grieving husband fighting, not for money, but for recognition, for the sanctity of his marriage, and for his deceased wife's true wishes. It detailed the subtle ways the Hendersons had marginalized me over the years. The discovery of Sarah's personal journal and her heartfelt note, and the ongoing legal skirmish, presented my refusal to pay for the funeral as a desperate, defiant act of a man pushed to his breaking point. The fallout was immediate and explosive. My phone, which had been silent, exploded again, not with calls from the Hendersons, but from friends, acquaintances, even strangers, offering support. Social media was ablaze. Community was divided, but a significant portion, especially those who knew Sarah or had observed the Hendersons' controlling behavior, rallied behind me. Then came the call from Harold's lawyer. He was less aggressive this time, his tone strained. "Mr. Miller, this publicity is unfortunate. Perhaps we can discuss a resolution, an amicable settlement regarding Mrs. Henderson's estate. "My lawyer will contact your lawyer," I replied, my voice steady. "My terms remain the same. Sarah's wishes are paramount, and I will not be erased." The Hendersons were humiliated. Carefully cultivated public image as a pillar of the community, as the loving, grieving family was shattered. People started talking, recalling their own experiences with the Hendersons' overbearing nature. Aunt Carol called again, her voice almost gleeful. "They're furious, David. Everyone's talking about it. Eleanor is beside herself." I felt a grim satisfaction, but it was hollow. This wasn't about vengeance. Not really. It was about truth. The official confrontation came weeks later, in a mediator's office. Miss Chen and I sat on one side of a large table. Harold, Eleanor, and Beth, flanked by their lawyer, sat on the other. The air crackled with tension. "We are here to discuss the estate of Sarah Marie Henderson," the mediator began, his voice calm and even. "Mr. Miller has presented evidence, including a handwritten note and journal entries from Sarah, indicating her clear intention for her husband, David Miller, to inherit her estate." Harold's lawyer scoffed. "A handwritten note is not a legal will. My clients are her next of kin. Perhaps not in the traditional sense, but it is compelling evidence of her testamentary intent, especially when coupled with her legal marriage to Mr. Miller." Miss Chen countered, her voice firm. "Furthermore, the pattern of exclusion, culminating in Mr. Miller's omission from her official obituary, raises serious questions about the Hendersons' respect for Sarah's marriage and wishes." Beth visibly bristled. "He's doing this for money. He's trying to steal from us." "No, Beth," I interjected, my voice quiet but firm. "I am doing this because you tried to erase me, because you lied about Sarah's life, because you dishonored her love for me." I pulled out the original newspaper clipping of the obituary, unfolded it, and slid it across the table toward. "You tell me. If I was nothing to her, why should I pay for her funeral? Why should I allow you to claim her entire legacy, when she explicitly stated her desire for me to have it?" Harold's face was beet red. Eleanor looked down at her hands, tears welling in her eyes. Whether from shame or self-pity, I couldn't tell. Beth was still defiant, but her eyes darted nervously between the obituary and the note, which lay on the table as well. The mediator cleared his throat. "Mr. Miller also has a strong claim regarding the funeral expenses. The public nature of his omission from the obituary, coupled with his role as her spouse, effectively severed his obligation in the eyes of the community, and arguably the law." The Hendersons' lawyer knew they were on shaky ground. Public sentiment, the evidence of Sarah's true wishes, and the clear-cut facts about the obituary made their position untenable. They faced public humiliation, a protracted legal battle they were likely to lose, and mounting legal fees. After a tense discussion, their lawyer leaned over and whispered to Harold. Harold sighed heavily, a sound of resignation. "My clients are willing to concede the estate to Mr. Miller," their lawyer announced, his voice devoid of its earlier aggression. "And they will cover all funeral expenses as they have already done." A wave of exhaustion, profound and overwhelming, washed over me. The truth had prevailed, but at the expense of what little family connection I might have salvaged with Sarah's kin. The silence that followed was heavy, but this time it felt like peace. The aftermath of the settlement was a strange mix of relief and a lingering emptiness. Sarah's family, humiliated and defeated, retreated. I didn't hear from them again, not directly. The mediator handled the final details of the estate transfer. It wasn't a vast fortune, but it was Sarah's. Her modest savings, the proceeds from the sale of her small art collection, and the house, which was now legally mine. These were not just assets, There were tangible links to her, to our shared life. I spent weeks sorting through her belongings, not as a chore, but as a ritual. Each item, from her worn paintbrushes to her favorite coffee mug, held a memory. The journal became my most cherished possession. I reread it often, hearing her voice in my head, feeling her presence. It was a constant reminder that our love was real, that it mattered, and that it had endured beyond their attempts to erase it. The house, once filled with her laughter and vibrant energy, now felt quiet. I didn't try to fill the silence immediately. I allowed myself to grieve, truly grieve, without the suffocating burden of the family conflict. The anger began to dissipate, leaving behind a raw, tender sadness. I cried, often and openly, for the woman I had lost, for the future we would never have. The local article had certainly made waves. People continued to approach me in the grocery store or on the street, offering words of sympathy and support. "I am so sorry for your loss, David," they'd say. "And I am sorry for what you went through." It was comforting in a way to know that the community largely understood, that Sarah's truth and mine had been seen. I started going back to my job, easing back into the routine. But things felt different. My perspective had shifted. Petty grievances of daily life seemed trivial in the face of such profound loss and betrayal. I learned a new kind of resilience, a quiet strength that had emerged from the depths of my pain. I also found small ways to honor Sarah, ways that were meaningful to us, not to her family's public image. I donated some of her art supplies to a local youth art program, a cause she would have championed. I commissioned a small, discreet plaque in her memory at a nature preserve where we often walked, a place of peace and beauty that was special to us. Didn't have a long list of survivors, just her name, her date, and the words, "Beloved artist, cherished wife." My small, quiet victory. One evening, about 6 months after her death, I received a card in the mail. It was from Aunt Carol. Inside, a handwritten note. "David, I heard the news. I am so glad. Sarah would be proud. She loved you deeply, and that's all that ever truly mattered. Stay strong." It was a small gesture, but it meant the world. A tiny thread of connection, a reminder that not everyone in her family was lost to their own prejudice. My relationship with Sarah's immediate family was irrevocably broken. There would be no reconciliation, no healing of that wound. They had chosen their narrative and I had chosen mine. It was a painful reality, but one I had to accept to move forward. I realized that my refusal to pay for the funeral was not just an act of defiance. It was a desperate cry for recognition, a demand to be seen, to have my love and my grief acknowledged. It was a battle for Sarah's truth, a truth that her family had tried to bury along with her. And in that fight, I found something unexpected. Myself. I found a strength I didn't know I possessed. I learned that grief is not just about sorrow. It's also about resilience, about fighting for what's right, even when everything feels wrong. Life would never be the same. The empty side of the bed would always be empty. The silence in the house would always carry an echo of her laughter. But I carried Sarah's memory not as a ghost, but as a living, vibrant presence. Her love was a part of me forever. And no obituary, no family, no amount of money could ever erase that. I had stopped paying for the funeral, but in doing so, I had started paying attention to what truly mattered, honoring the woman I loved, and preserving the truth of our shared life. And that, I realized, was the only legacy that truly mattered.